Thank you. So, I've got the panel back. I've had a few questions, because we're streaming live on Facebook. We had a few questions on Facebook. They're not all completely aligned here.
What, the questions or the panelists?
The questions. So let me just throw one out there that came in. It's from Lamin Jame. It says, under human rights, what possible solution can you identify to end child labour in the Gambia? I think it's a couple of months early. We'll come back to that. We'll come back to a couple of months early for that one. But there's a few interesting ones here which I'll try and put together. So there's been quite a few questions around the 50 million that was mentioned that the UK invests into South Africa. I think that took a lot of people by surprise, that the UK was the biggest investor in South Africa. I think many people didn't know that. And there's a few questions. One from Sebastian Wilson says, is that actual money or is it consulting services type thing?
Okay, it's actually an amount that is going to be phased over a 4-year period. And it's about making sure that there is good trade and investment between the UK and South Africa. And it's also aimed at assisting actually UK businesses to be able to invest in South Africa. But overall, it is said that it will assist South Africa in terms of its own developmental goals, which are also enshrined in the National Development Plan of the country.
Good, very good. There's a few around China's influence in Africa. And culturally and economically, is China a player in South Africa? And how is South Africa handling this? Let me throw that in.
It's an interesting question.
And that's from Adam Highland.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. China has, over the decades, cultivated liberation movements in Africa and built very strong fraternal relationships with all the liberation movements. So China is well placed in Africa, and it has good relations with African countries. South Africa, as with many things, is different in that in South Africa we have a strong democracy, we have strong trade unions, and so the Chinese are not able to come in and bring lots of workers because the trade unions would be up in arms and so forth. But it's a very important strategic relationship between China and South Africa. Interestingly, they cooperate on a lot of things. For instance, the China Fund is based in Johannesburg. The Africa Fund for China is based in Johannesburg. And there's a very serious strategic relationship, which was particularly strong under President Thabo Mbeki. But it's still the case today. And you would have heard that the 50 million coming from the UK is a drop in the ocean compared to the target Ramaphosa has set to raise $100 billion of new investment over the next 5 years. So that money is, it's an important gesture, but it's, as Pumela says, it's to oil the wheels.
Correct. Of something much bigger.
Of something much bigger. So China, just to complete, China is both a strategic partner of South Africa and a competitor in Africa. So the two countries that are investing in other African countries are China and South Africa, the two biggest investors. And sometimes they clash, but they don't clash publicly. It's stuff that gets resolved behind the scenes.
Anything to add?
Well, this is more emotional than anything else. The Chinese presence in Africa worries me a bit. It's a form of colonialism that I think should worry everybody. I think that it's quite interesting. I think South Africa is different because of the checks and balances and the nature of the infrastructure. Unfortunately, I think that the activities in Zimbabwe are wholly another story and very worrying because we don't know what they own. They probably own mines and land that we'll find out about in 20 or 30 years' time. There's big concern that the Chinese are very good at doing good business with corrupt governments. So that's my only caveat.
Yeah, I would just add one more thing. Of all the countries in the world at the moment, China has by far the biggest vision of the future. The one you would have heard of, the One Belt, One Road, involving 65 countries.
Yes.
This is mega, mega, mega.
Yes.
And you can take the view that it's a form of neo-colonialism or imperialism, You can take that view, but
But
you can also take the
that
view.
they build roads, they build airports, they build
Absolutely,
hospitals. They
and it's
build-
going to contribute to the economies of all those countries. So, take your pick.
And well-run governments can have better deals.
Well-run governments.
Well-run governments can actually manage it through the
Yes.
confidence of the
Yes.
interaction.
Right on.
So Frank Hogan puts a really interesting case here. It's quite a good, to shorten the question, he's saying that behind every population explosion there is some good news. And one of the things he points to, that if you think of where black people were some time ago, the incidence of graduates of skills, there's a talent pipeline coming through. And that's a cause for hope and to be capitalised upon. Views?
When you look at the middle class that has developed in South Africa that didn't exist when I first went into business, you didn't see that did not exist. That is now a real thing. If you go back to just the small fundamentals, I would go and buy 3 items with no branding because I wanted 3 items. The middle class of South Africa today goes out and buys a branded item. It's a very upmarket behaviour, and it has changed a lot of the way consumers and retailers have behaved in South Africa. So that has created an economic growth in South Africa with the people and brought the uplifted the economy a huge amount and provided a lot of growth for well-known brands, consumer brands, drinks, food, clothing, whatever you name. So I think that growth in the middle class is a very powerful change agent, because if you think South Africa as part of Africa, our generic DNA is about being a nomadic people. We don't have capital. We don't have a fundamentally, if you go back a little bit further, we don't have a fundamental understanding of capital, of ownership, of rights, of borders. That is not the DNA of Africa. The DNA of Africa is the rain was over there, the sun is over there, my cows have eaten all the grass there, I'm now going to move. And they move and it doesn't belong to anyone. So that's that nomadic aspect. We're bringing a first world concept into an environment that's still immature in comparison. Now, who says we're right in the first place? One of the questions, but that's a different argument that we're not going to have today. And it's getting that generations change. And I look at how much has changed just in my lifetime.
Correct.
It is unbelievable.
Just one word on the numbers, if I may.
Please.
I think there is an upside to numbers. If you look at the world's largest and fastest growing economies, they're the economies of the numbers. 1.3 billion China, 1.2 billion India, and Brazil. Brazil's going through a difficult period, and Nigeria. So it's not all bad, but it magnifies all the problems and tests the leadership to the limits.
It
Let's take the
therefore
first
creates focus for them to
Creates focus.
actually, it creates the focus of business, it creates the focus of government, it creates the focus of production, and therefore education.
And there's opportunity in all of those.
And people that are unemployed can become employed because they can see opportunity, they can take that into their own hands.
Let's take the first question, please. Please. Let's wait for the microphone. Can I have your name and your organisation, please, sir?
Nick Stadlin.
Yes.
It's a question about leadership and race.
Please.
Nelson Mandela, it has now become, there are beginnings of people criticising Mandela for not having made enough economic radical transformation. The reality is that without the peace that Mandela secured, there would have been no transition, no peaceful transition, and no multiracial democracy. In the last year or two, there has been a new narrative, much of it we now know fueled by the Bell-Pottinger scandal, in which a narrative, deliberately cynical narrative of post-colonial white capital
Yes.
was engendered to deflect criticism from the cronyism and the corruption.
Yes.
And as in America, under Trump, as in Brexit, in England, as in Poland, it's an easy populist issue card to play.
Yes.
The question is this. Given that Cyril Ramaphosa has his origins in the struggle in the 1980s as a de facto leader of the opposition, and has a political interest in associating himself, as he did in the Grand Parade just after he was elected, saying that it's necessary for South Africa to revert to the values of decency and integrity of Mandela, does he not have both a political interest and a genuine belief based in his roots in the struggle, that is a cause for optimism that, unlike Zimbabwe, for example, that race will not be an issue, and that there will be a reversion to the origins of the ANC, which was multiracial.
Great question.
Yeah, it's
a highly charged environment. And race is always just scratching beneath the surface.
Politics and the party politics underneath that as well.
I think Cyril Ramaphosa is non-racial in his being. He is. It's in his DNA, and that's also to do with him being an internal. I mean, under the Zuma government particularly, but not only the Zuma government, it was already happening under the previous government. The race card became a card which a lot of people were playing for economic reasons, for whatever reasons. And I think Ramaphosa will bring that back to a more genuinely non-racial situation. Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
If you recall, during the time of the Bell Pottinger scandal, he was deputy president. And even at that time, he said, business has no color. He said, business is business. And so if he said that when he was deputy president, it is very likely that that's the ethos that he'll carry as the president as well.
It will not be easy, though.
Well, Malema's whole raison d'etre is to vilify the whites. And I think, going back to what you were saying, I absolutely agree. I think that this burgeoning middle class is one of the elements that's going to keep Malema's radical anti-white rhetoric at bay. Because the middle class...
So let me just explain. So Julius Malema was, before, a member of the ANC and the leader of the Youth League. He was expelled from the ANC for being so loudly anti-Zuma, and he's created his own party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, the EFF, and they are loud, divisive,
Clever.
Quite effective, very
effective, very small, very loud,
very effective.
and dynamically opposed to most things.
But they have a very small electorate, position in government. It's what, 6% or something?
6 to
8%. So they're not an opposition. They are just another small party. But they are very clever politically, very clever judicially, or using the courts, using the judicial system, making a lot of noise. And the disenfranchised are saying, actually, this is quite energetic, this is quite interesting.
Yeah. At last, someone's standing up for us.
Somebody's standing up. But what Cyril needs to do is to bring him back inside the ANC and say to him, you could be president, but on the outside you can never be president, but on the inside you could be.
Good luck to Cyril on that one. Julius has found his voice big time.
Absolutely.
And he was able to completely eclipse the official opposition, which is 3 times the size.
Yeah, absolutely.
By staging things in Parliament which the official opposition would never have done, literally having almost fist fights and being dragged out by the scruff of their neck.
Because he doesn't care.
And the red overalls are a very clever touch, actually.
And the red berries.
And the red berries.
He's a good marketer.
Incredibly clever.
Let's take
Politically
another
and
question.
dangerous, therefore clever.
Let me take another question, please. Have I got the shyest audience we've ever had? Please, thank you very much.
So it's a slightly different question based
And what's
on
your name, please?
My name is Lena. A slightly different question based on what we've just been talking about. Bearing in mind that there is an increased investment in infrastructure and manufacturing and with the views to creating jobs, does the South African government have any plans to invest in leisure provision for a growing middle class?
Yeah, this is interesting. So, and it's interesting we talk about this burgeoning middle class. And what we've seen across Africa, it's the key to unlocking lots of investment. Without it, lots of things don't happen. And South Africa is probably in the vanguard of a growing middle class, both black and white. Leisure.
Can I link it to tourism?
Yes.
Yeah. South Africa currently, employs about more than 700,000 people directly in terms of jobs in the tourism sector. And the challenge that they've been, and that is South Africa's most growing sector in terms of the economy. And so the challenge that has been put then by the current president is that that number must be doubled. it must be doubled in two ways. One, South African homes must be able to open up so that they can be host homes for foreigners who are coming into South Africa to come and experience the culture, but also to ensure that all the support is being given for South Africa to be able to lure tourists into the country. So there is that focus and the realization that tourism is a growth sector, and all the necessary support is being put in there. And that would also then include the leisurely activities. And if I may talk about the UK alone, apart from us, apart from Graham, but John, Sharon, myself, who are representing South Africa here, there are so many other agencies, particularly tourist agencies, which are in this country, and they will offer you bespoke packages if you are interested in going to South Africa, depending on what it is that you like.
Okay, can I take the counter position?
Go on then.
Tourism in South Africa is one of the most underperforming of the industries in South Africa. This is a jewel of a country. It's one of the most beautiful countries in the world, if not the most beautiful. And it's an underperforming sector on a grand scale. For example, over the last 3 or 4 years, 30% more Brit holiday makers have been going to Australia than South Africa. Now, Australia is this distant desert island with a couple of little colonial cities around the ring that are marginally interesting. I go there a lot. I like it. South Africa is a spectacular country that is undersold in the tourism sector. It underperforms. The numbers are declining year on year. The number of Brits going to South Africa declining. Why? Somebody must explain to me why SA tourism hasn't been taken into account. South African Airways is a failed airline. It's absolutely swimming in debt. They're cutting their routes to key markets. They sold their slot between Cape Town and Heathrow about 4 or 5 years ago. They're cutting their services to Johannesburg, and Virgin and BA are moving in. This is an industry that needs a really good kick.
Yeah, it's a slightly
Hard to argue with Graham on that.
No, I'm not going to argue with Graham on that.
We can, but we'll take it as a call to action.
Yeah. I'll just emphasize the first part of what he said, which was that it's the most beautiful country in the world. It's a slightly different point, but I think a great tragedy about South Africa is that successive ANC governments have not invested in the incredible arts and culture talent in the country. And, if we had music now, I could demonstrate it because Pumela would get up and dance and sing. It's just, we export amazing tenors and baritones and opera singers, and but it's a struggle. We've got to raise money here to get them to go to the Guildhall Music or whatever. And I would do anything to change.
Do you know
that.
what's really interesting to your point here? And it's not just South Africa. South Africa it's a fabulous place. It is so hard to get in. You get to the airports, the queues are everywhere. Why?
Oh,
Because there are many tourists, contrary to what Graham is saying. There are many tourists coming to South Africa at the same time.
You'd think that you want us to
That's
come
your
and welcome
excuse?
us.
That there are too many tourists coming at the same time? And the queue at Oliver Tambo Airport's
Sounds
out
like
to
America.
the airplane.
But it's like
appalling
anywhere
excuse.
else in the world. If I go to America, they even take my calculator and swipe it to
It's
check
worse
that
than
it's not.
anywhere else in the world. Joburg
It is
Airport
the
on a
same.
Sunday morning is appalling. There's no excuse. And you talk to the immigration guys, they blame the government. They say it's the government's fault because they're not enough staff.
I'm going to take another question. Done that one, please, sir. Jacob, please.
Right, probably not a question, but a comment.
Yes,
And
we would expect
I
that
just
from
like
you.
his comment because he is selling South Africa better
Graham.
than me. He is actually. What he's saying about tourism in South Africa, that the opportunities that are there in the tourist industry in South Africa are immense, and they still can be.
Are you completely
explode.
Are you completely objective here? What do you do? What do you do? Share with us. What do you do?
And the other thing is, it's just what I wanted to say, that we've been talking about Cyril and failing to realize that Cyril is part of a team.
Yes.
There is what we call collective leadership. And if you look at who Cyril is bringing in to surround himself with, those are the people who are really out to make South Africa a great country economically. And that's the leadership that we actually need in South Africa. Not Cyril as a person, he's not alone.
It's the team that he brings in.
Yeah.
Team that he is working.
Building the team. Yeah.
That is something very important. And there is a lot in South Africa that is the possibility are, or the opportunities are quite immense. And he's bringing that. I was just last week listened to him and the team that he brought along to the Commonwealth of States. And I was talking to some of the investors in South Africa who are, and I saw the enthusiasm in them, in what he is bringing. And that is something to actually appreciate and look forward to, and to say to you that South Africa has quite a lot. I'm not talking here for the government. It's got a lot to offer. And obviously, we have a whole lot of other things to deal with in South Africa that was expected. Problems, there are issues that we have to deal with, but South Africa is dealing with those issues, and whatever those issues are, if anybody didn't expect those, then that person didn't know South Africa, because those are things that were expected to be a very politicized nation,
Yes.
very politicized. They went through a whole lot of history of being brutalized. I think John said that. And you can see some of those things happening. And also, what you said about the media can play a very positive role and a very negative role at the same time. that is, South African media is now free to criticize as much as they want of South Africa. They are given that, something that they never had.
Which is healthy.
And that's something, it should be taken as a positive, not as a negative.
Very good.
And that is the opening that is there for South Africa and for the world to come and say, look here, we are open for investment. And I don't want to go into all the details of investing, how easy it is to invest in South Africa and how wonderful it is. So
let's take your points. You made a few good points. So let's start with the first point. The first point, which is, it's not just Cyril, it's the team. Let's have some comments about the team. How do you feel about the team he's bringing in? Because he makes a really good point. Cyril can't do this on him, but is his judgment good? Is he bringing heavyweights in?
He is. And if you think he's only been the president of the country for 60 days, he's achieved an enormous amount. Pumela listed some of the things he's done earlier, but he has also had to make pretty radical changes to his cabinet. He had to basically get rid of about 10 people who were too tainted with the corruption of the past. No, the corruption isn't going to go away. It's deep-rooted, but you have to first, cut what's there, and then you work on the other areas. He's got rid of the corrupt leadership in the state revenue collection, and he has very recently shifted the head of the intelligence services, which was an absolutely key one, because clearly that was all set up to support Zuma. So
it's a team. Let's broaden this out.
But just to say that the quality of the people he's bringing in, given the limitations that politicians have, you can't suddenly pluck people from who aren't in government, are very good.
If I look at it from the business aspect of the points that you brought about of how easy it is to invest in South Africa, if you'd looked at 5 years ago, if somebody had come to me and asked for my advice on whether they should invest in South Africa as an individual or as a company, I would say if you want to invest in lifestyle or giving back or investing into the country and expecting nothing back in return, by all means go ahead and do it. But you're not going to get your own return on investment as a commercial operation. If I look at it now, and you ask me for my advice now, I'd say now, given bringing the money in under correct exchange control processes, which exist, get it in the correct manner, invest into the economy, invest into education, invest into business, invest into infrastructure. It is probably the one place you can get the best return on investment now than you could probably get anywhere in the world, because you've got a very strong governance structure in the country, you've got a very strong judiciary, you've got a very strong banking system, you've got a very strong credit system, and you've got a good work ethic. So you've got a lot of things going for you. And with a bit of luck, you might save the currency from doing the things it's done pretty nastily in the past. It's not doing very well at the moment today, it's doing terribly today, but that's Trump's problem and Trump's involvement, not South Africa's. But I think it's a place where you can't say, as you did before, the rand is going to depreciate to the point that you're not going to get any money out again. I think if you invest wisely, I think it has a very good opportunity.
But we're only growing at 1.5%.
That's
And
now.
how do we get that up?
Doing more of what we have to do. We've got to get in there. Everyone's got to come from all angles, educate the youth.
Is there the education? Is there the education platform?
Education in South Africa's got it's a very good standard of education.
Is it?
It's a very good standard of
I
education.
don't remember that. I remember it was a shocking
No,
system.
I think
Didn't
it
you
actually,
study it?
Yeah, yes. Well, look at me.
I think South Africa has a good education system. I think it can improve. Absolutely, it can improve. But
And that's across the board.
I think across the
that's
board.
permeating into the.
If you amount of charity work that's going into education, right from the vulnerable children to those that are homeless, the amount of money, charitable money and not-for-profit money and individuals' efforts that are going into education children and bringing sport to children and bringing that understanding of community to children, they're going to grow up in a non-racial thought where things are the way they should be from a government point of view or from a behaviour point of view. The young children that grew up when I grew up, we grew up so disparate that it's just not like that anymore. It has improved.
I think that's already happened, hasn't it?
Yes.
I mean, I don't think of South Africa as a racial country at all. Those noises are coming from extremists like Malema and a few right-wing nut jobs. But generally, it's not.
But even that statement alone is amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That you can now consider it as non-racial. Even that's amazing in a short
Children
space of
born
time.
today don't see colour. They
that's
go
right.
to
That's
school
quite
and
right.
they don't see colour. They don't know what us older people are talking about when you talk about the apartheid era. Brilliant. That's the way it should be. They need to understand the history. They need to know what their forefathers have been through.
I'm going to take a final question, but before I do, as I give search for the final question, can I set up the closing remarks? And I want a two-sided closing remark from each of you.
Ooh, two-sided.
Yes.
What does that mean?
I want something about South Africa's future that keeps you awake at night, that worries you, and something about South Africa's future that gives you tremendous hope. So both of you, for both sides of it, all of you, think about that. Let me take a final question first from my
Sure,
end.
we've got a moment.
I've got two final questions. I'll take Stephen and Hugh. I'll take both of yours together. So I'll do Stephen, then I'll take Hugh, and then I'll take the rest. Please.
Hi. To answer one question about tourism, I think if you take a poll of people about how they perceive South Africa, and I think they would say that there's a very negative signal coming through that it's violent.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's one thing. And I think for me that leads me on to a more fundamental issue, and that is why not enough, really not enough has been done in the townships.
So that's a great question, and I'm going to come to that. Let me take Hugh's question as well, please. So let's think about that. What more could have been done? What should be done?
My name's Hugh Daly, and I come from Belfast, the really most beautiful place in the world, I think. I came here with mention of South Africa. We would keep a close eye on what's happening in South Africa at home because of the parallels that there are between the troubles that we have had and the troubles that you had. And you're so lucky because it has barely been mentioned. We are in a situation where there are people, both in politics and outside politics, in the dark corners of society, that are trying to drag us back to that. And it's there in our face all the time. Nobody here has mentioned it. It has been passed over as part of your past, but it might as well be a long, distant past.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, really good point.
what you are speaking about now is grown-up politics. Is what in 1994 you would have given your kidney for. The fact that you're doing what a country does. These are the arguments that a real country has.
Yes.
You're not worried about getting tailed on the way home, or worried about your phone being tapped, worried about all these things that were everyday occurrences for you for 2 years. You're in a situation now where, as it was mentioned earlier on, your middle classes are increasing. And on the promotional video earlier on, it was said that the education system is being invested more in. And, you know, I think the solution to the problem as far as your population is going to be is that when more children are getting educated to a certain standard, you're going to have a more useful nation that are going to be able to work and to generate all this new revenue for you. So it's amazing that you said that you're a non-racial state. Imagine what this was like. If you had said this 20 years ago, you would have been thrown out on the door for being a nincompoop, you know. And now you're in a situation on a panel talking about just how special your place is. Coming from where I come from, and we aspire to be where you are. We would love to be where you are. We would love to be where you are. So you should be very proud. I know you are all very proud of where you're from, but we would love to be in your situation.
Give the man a round of applause, please. So I'm going to come back to Hugh in a moment, because that was heartfelt and a great reminder. But let's do Stephen's. Stephen, remind us that one of the things that holds back the real huge numbers of tourism is there's this feeling of violence.
Perception of crime.
Yes.
Well, that's
violence.
Okay. Well, that's if I could just jump in. That's one of my big beefs with SA tourism. You figure this out. Look, I go there all the time. You don't encounter violence. You're very unlucky if it happens to you. It doesn't happen to the tourists. It tends to be violence that's conducted in dark corners of South Africa. But this is a reputation thing, and it's very hard to shake it off. My argument has always been SA tourism, you don't actually have to do a hell of a lot. You've got to work on that image of South Africa as a violent country. You've got to find a way, and we're talking about solutions here, you've got to find a way of persuading the world that it isn't dangerous to go to South Africa, because it isn't, and we know that it isn't.
Very good.
So that's my problem with SA tourism.
Let's move to Hugh. Hugh's was heartfelt. We were in Belfast last Friday. Last Friday. And I've been going for many years. And I was mentioning to you that you get to the airport and you get that feeling that an intangible, that things have moved on. So I remember the really dark days. But Hugh's right. It's the divide is still there. It's tangible, it's alive, it's breathing, it's dynamic, and it's not pleasant.
So in other words, religion goes deeper than colour.
Religion
can do. All sort of tribal.
Religion goes deeper than colour.
But how do you feel with Hugh's provocation? You're having adult conversations about real politics.
It makes me very proud to hear you say that, because I don't think I would have recognised it until you drew a comparison. And it does make me sit here thinking how much we have grown up in 20 years. Well, we grew up, the growing up started with PW getting unwell, FW coming in, Nelson Mandela coming. So it all started in sort of the late 80s, not in 94, because we needed those 6 years of transition. Otherwise, we wouldn't have got to 94 in the way and in the capability we did. So I think we've got a lot of people from both sides to thank for it. But I think the likes of F.W. de Klerk and Nelson Mandela, who jointly won the Peace Prize, I think that just says it all. That actually epitomizes what we've achieved as a country thereafter.
I think generally speaking, the racial issue, and race is just below the surface, it's not based on racial hatred. It's an opportunistic thing, largely. So we're no longer arguing about the terms of the settlement. To put it in crass terms, we're arguing about how you distribute the the spoils of freedom. But that's okay, because that is a kind of normal debate, and there is a process taking place which is moving in the right direction, despite the fact that we had a very bad sort of 9 years behind us. Yeah.
But even so, please.
Let me teach you a bit of South African speak. When someone says something as great as what he has said, in South Africa they say, give that man a bell. So shall we say, give that man a bell? Which is the...
He got a big bell there. He got
the whiskey. The bell's the whiskey. Yes.
So look, let me take you to our closing remarks. You've given us some reason for hope and optimism, and you've given us some sobering thoughts as well of how deeply entrenched some of the issues are. But from you as individuals, what is it that really worries you and keeps you awake about the future? And what is it that gives you that confidence? Sharon.
The part that worries me most is crime and corruption. Still, to a degree, I know we've talked about it has improved, but the lack of value for life, the theft, the insecurity. I mean, I've been through a hijacking. I've been through that kind of really traumatic experience. And I worry still for certain people that is not eradicated. And linked to that is the deep-rooted corruption that still exists in the economy. Those are where my main concerns are, and I do believe that everybody wants to get rid of it, and I do believe that there's a vehicle and a mechanism to address it. My hope, and what I see as being the saviour for South Africa, is the civil society that has actually become mobilised that wasn't beforehand, because we were quite apathetic, like most people globally are quite apathetic. And I think the commercial and competent expertise and the love people have for the country, saying, well, I've got nowhere else to go. I don't want to go anywhere else. I wish to live in this country, therefore I will make it work. And you arrive at our Tambo airport, and if it's not the queues that you're having to deal with, the pleasure is walking out of the airport into the open area, and all you see are the smiles. And that is the positive. And the other thing that I think is really fantastic is the bush. I have to go and get dust under my fingernails as regularly as I need to.
John.
Yeah, well, I think to summarise, the positives for me are the strength of the institutions and the fact they've rooted, and of course in that one includes the Constitution. This kind of less tangible resilience factor of South Africans, that they always come back fighting, and we go right to the edge of the cliff, and just before we're going to fall over, something miraculous happens, and we come back from the cliff, so pull up the rope. So that seems to be sort of quite deep in our history. And yes, I have a genuine belief that South Africans actually have more in common than separates them. My fears would be that the forces of darkness, and there are forces of darkness, and there are people exploiting those forces of darkness. Bill Pottinger's gone, but what they started is still very much there. I actually get those WhatsApps all the time. I haven't blocked it because I want to know what they're thinking, and it comes every day. 4, 5, 6 fairly vitriolic pieces, which are not there to explain or to unite. They're there to divide. And we're going to have to deal with that. But I think that the forces of goodness outweigh the forces of darkness. That's what I would say.
Graham.
Well, I'm now a born-again optimist.
God, it wasn't easy.
It's like going to church. No, I think the thing that I would say, I sort of concur with what everyone else has been saying. I guess my fear is that the economic upliftment that's necessary to draw the marginalised people into the mainstream isn't going to happen quick enough, and the forces of darkness will then perpetrate. I mean, I think that there is a possible revolution in South Africa down the road if all of the good stuff isn't done, and very, very quickly. And so that's the bad thing. The good thing is the people. The people are amazing. And talking about Ramaphosa's team, I mean, they are such incredibly capable people in South African politics. The fact that Zuma had a whole lot of other ones is no longer the case. The fact is that if Ramaphosa does the right thing, he's got a really smart gene pool to draw on, and let's hope he does it. I want to see, I was saying earlier to someone, I want to see the Macron of South Africa. Where are the 35-year-olds with slightly older wives? Where are they? I mean, Africa has relied on even older leaders than the West has. I'd love to see this generation of smart 35-year-olds come through and reinvent us. Are they not ready yet?
Julius, we've got to be careful of still.
Julius is 45.
A proper one. Yeah, Julius is older than he does.
Something.
Sorry.
Last but not least, Pumela.
Okay.
Words of wisdom.
Firstly, I think to talk about the crime issue that was mentioned here is very important. But what gives me hope in that regard is the fact that the Minister of Police is energetic, and he's a sort of no-nonsense man who even says police must go to the gym. There must be no fat policeman. I mean, he makes it that simple. And the increased focus on police stations. What this current regime has said is that there's going to be more resources that are deployed to ensure that police stations are well resourced, and that there are going to be community policing forums and bringing in youth in terms of policing crime. So that gives me hope that even the crime situation is being attended to with specific tangibles. Part of what worries me is, how are we going to maintain the euphoria? There is the euphoria in the country, the energy levels are high, and so there are great expectations, and it's also about how are we going to manage the expectations to ensure that we manage the fact that there might be an expectation that everything must be done today and even yesterday for tomorrow. So those are the expectations to manage in that regard. What gives me hope is the fact that just in this first quarter of this year, we see the rating agencies are starting to upgrade us again. We see the World Bank projecting positive economic growth. And as we speak, South Africa is now regarded as 2018's most emerging market for investments, which means that we are back to being the hot cake. And I'm thankful.
Give her a big round of applause, please. So look, we've covered a heck of a lot of ground. We've worked them hard. They've been a mix of massively confident and optimistic, and just the odd touch of pessimism. But Sharon, Graham, Pumela, John, they've been fantastic. Join me in giving them a fantastic round.
Oh, wow. You know what my
so
weakness is. Wow.
You are very smart.
This is my personal weakness, champagne.
What a weekness.
Do we have to declare
So look,
this in
thank
the
you very much for joining us tonight.
Not over 50.
We'll be back. When's our next event, Diana?
24th of May.
24th of May, we'll be back here talking about engagement, the power of recognition. I will have another superb panel. It's going to talk about not just, we don't just work for the rewards, the power of feeling recognised and someone valuing your contribution. Come and join us for a drink, and I'll see you on the 24th, did you say?
Yes,
24th of May. One more round of applause for a great panel, please.